So next up, we're going to be working on the game mode, which means we need to look at the logic that it's going through. Now initially, it's checking when the ball is destroyed, whether it can spawn another one. Now it's either going to spawn a ball or it's going to end the game. When it ends the game, it needs to do some logic based on whether it's currently setting a high score or not, and that's very important. So we're going to call the getSaveGameData function that we've already created. Now after we add this getSaveGameData, what we're now going to do is we're going to check its length. And the reason we're going to check its length is we want to see how many entries are actually in there. Because if it's below a certain number, we know we definitely want to add it. However, if it's equal to the maximum number of entries, then we want to check to see whether we're allowed to go in there or not. So I'm going to do a quick check on the length of the array. So to do that, I'm going to get the save structs, and I'm going to check its length, which returns a number of how many entries are currently in this array. Now let's say at any one time I only want to have 4 save games in there, so 4 high scores saved. I'm going to branch, and if it's less than or it's equal to 3, we know we want to add it, so I'm going to execute this true pin. However, if that's false, I'm going to check one other thing, which is I'm going to check the minimum float, which means we're going to get this, and I'm going to do that check that I had before, which was lowest score value. Just going to quickly tidy this up as I go. So I'm going to check the lowest score value. I'm going to split this struct, and I'm just going to see if this score is less than the current score, that's when we also want to add it. So both of these are going to result in us wanting to add something to the score. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make one last thing in my high score save, which is going to be a new function, which is just going to be called addScore. And addScore is going to have an input, which is going to be a struct that we had before, the high score struct. And this is going to be called newScore. Now, we could put the validation inside of this function if we wanted to. It's really up to us how we want to handle this. For the time being, all I'm going to do is I'm going to get the save struct array. I'm going to add this to the save struct array. I'm then going to sort it. So I'm going to call add. I can add the new score to it. At which point I'm going to sort the save data. So I'm going to drag in this function that we created before. After we've sorted the save data, I then want to get this, and I want to set the size to be either the size of 4, or if this current struct is lower than 4, to be equal to that. So either 4 or that. It'll just size up those two numbers and set it to that. So this min function pulls, if I enter 2 values into it, it gets me the lowest of those 2 numbers. So this way, if length is somehow over 4, so if it's 5, it'll drop this size down to 4. And because we've sorted this struct in order of highest to lowest, it means that this will remove the remaining things on there. So I'm going to compile save. Now you've got to be careful here because we've gone ahead and made 2 functions called addScore. One is on the game mode and one is on the pinball game mode. In hindsight, I probably should have named these differently. Actually, I might save that now just in case. So I might actually rename this function to be called addHighScore. At this point, we need to now enter that addScore function that we created. However, we do have a slight issue. We could hook it up here for the time being and drop in a quick node. However, we haven't actually given the player the ability to enter their name yet. So what we're going to do here is add a very quick widget that will show the high scores currently and give us a little text box to fill in a new one. This is purely for the sake of us having something that we can kind of work with for the time being, and we'll pretty it up later. But for the time being, I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to user interface, and I'm going to create a new widget blueprint that's just going to be called high score entry. And high score entry is going to have a text box, that is going to be anchored in the center of the screen. I'm going to set its position to be 0, 0. And because this is now putting it in that bottom left corner, I'm going to set the alignment to be 0.5 and 0.5, which moves it halfway across and halfway up, such that it's now anchored dead center of the screen. I'm also going to size this to content, and I'm going to stretch it out a bit, actually, its default size. So I'm going to drag this out, and I'm going to drag this out. So for the time being, that's going to be just our entry box. And the other thing I'm going to do is add a text box that is going to output the current high scores. So it's going to be set up with an anchor point in the center of the screen. And this is now going to be set as, actually I might just center this out as well. Should be fine. So let's go here. And this will definitely be set to size to content, because this will be high scores dash number. It'll kind of look like this over and over and over again. Instead of the word high scores though, it'll be someone's name. So what we're going to do here is when this menu gets loaded up, we're going to create a binding. And this text, which we should really rename, so I'm just going to set this to be called high scores list, and this can be called text entry. In my graph, all I'm going to do is get the game mode. After I get the game mode, I'm going to cast to pinball game mode. Somehow that fails, which it never should. I'm going to return nothing, but if it does succeed, I want it to return a string that is made up of the current save data. Now we can only get into this if the current save object is true, because this is going to get loaded up from that screen. So I'm going to get the current save object, and I'm going to run a for loop on it. So I'm going to get structs, for loop, and all I'm going to do is create a new local variable, which is just going to be called output text, which is going to be equal to, basically we're going to run through the array, save the current line of text to a buffer, and then go to the next line and add that to the current buffer, and then add that until we're done. So to do that, all I need to do here is I need to get the current array element, and I need to create a format text, which is format text. So this is the function that we used before, that is going to be called name dash score. So see how I put those two in braces? And output text will be equal to, it'll be equal to the current output text with a new line added to it, and this. There's a couple of different ways that you can do this. I personally find that the quickest way is to do this. I used to go old, hold shift enter, and then type in new. This is just a really cheeky way to do it, but it works. Which is just going to go get the current array's name and score, and then add that to it. So the name and the score now gets appended into the old one, which is going to be output text. Cool. Compile, save. So that should work, and then at the end of it, it outputs the output text. That'll work as just a super simple list. And finally, the event, if back in the designer, this is going to be where they input their text. And upon entering this into the text, what I'm going to do is, so I'm going to go down the bottom, and you can see this on text committed function. I'm going to click plus, and that's going to add that. So now when they hit enter after entering their text, it's now going to do this, which is what we're going to use for our function to call the add high score. So I'm going to get this, and I'm going to get the game mode. pinball. I'm going to convert this to a pure because I know this has to be true at this point. I'm going to then get the save object, and I'm going to call that function that we created. And the new score that we enter into it, the text is going to be the name that they just entered, and the score that goes into it is going to be the current score of the game mode. Now this isn't going to exit out after they hit enter right now, so that's going to be a problem, but it's still going to be enough that we can see whether this works or not. So as a very quick thing, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a in the same way that we had that function earlier in the player controller that was create HUD, we're going to do the same kind of thing, but this is now going to be to load the high scores list onto their screen. Now there's a couple of ways we could do this. I'm just going to make a custom event here for the time being that's called create high scores list, which is going to get the current player. So I get current player, gets type in get controller and you'll get player controller. We know there's only one of them, so I'm just going to get this cast to pinball player controller. I'm going to convert this to pure, and from here I'm going to add a I want to create a widget for it. So I'm going to type in the word widget. The widget that we're going to be creating is a high score entry, at which point I'm going to add to viewport, and in theory we're going to get something that's going to begin functioning when I plug this in. So off of this true, I'm going to call create high score list, and off of this true I'll do the same, compile save. So now I'm just going to quickly test that. So I'm just going to let myself die. Ball goes out, new ball comes into play. And this should be my last one. Oh, okay. We're missing one thing, which is rather straightforward, and that is, at the moment, whenever we go to spawn the ball up here in onBallDestroyed, the thing that we should be doing is decrementing the current balls remaining to have one fewer. So I'm just going to get balls remaining. Now I could do balls remaining is equal to balls remaining minus 1, but I can also actually just type in minus minus, and it will give me this nice little function called decrementInt. If I plug that in, this will now reduce balls remaining over time. So let's test that out. Got our first one. Got our second one. Actually, I should get a quick score just so I've got myself on the list. And this should be our last one. Now this has popped up with our list as we requested, although it has given us another issue, which is that I don't have actually a visible cursor. So I'm going to need to quickly fix that up. So to get that, all I need to do here is, upon creating the high score widget, I'm also going to drag off the player controller, and I'm going to type in the word cursor. And there's a function called setShowMouseCursor. I'm just going to set that to true. You can now see that my mouse cursor appears, and I'm now able to just type in a name. And you can see that upon hitting enter, it's gone off and done this. So the reason for this issue is actually rather simple. I'm going to go to my high score entry, and if I look at the onText committed, there's a nice little switch that I can make off of commit method. So I'm typing the word switch, and all I'm going to do here is I'm going to say that on enter, run the add high score command. So from here to here to here. And now when I compile and save, I'm going to see this. So when I type in a score, it'll have my name hyphen the score. Now it's still missing one very crucial step for a save, in that it's not actually saving yet, which is rather simple. I can actually from here call save game to slot, and I can call that save game object to get called into the HighScores save name. So that will now save it after I play every time and keep an ongoing list of scores. However, we're also missing one other thing, which is upon saving it to the slot, we also want to then remove the HighScore menu and go to what would now effectively be a main menu. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to make pinball game mode, and I'm going to create a custom event, which is just going to be called create main menu. And in much the same way that I created the HighScores list, I'm just going to uncheck that. I'm going to hit Control W, just so that we've got this set up. So the other thing that I'm going to do is just right click and tap in remove all widgets, so that when we go to create our main menu, it's going to erase anything that's currently there. So now I'm going to look at creating a widget that's never actually going to be directly put onto my viewport. Instead, this is going to be a widget that we can put into other widgets. So this widget that we're creating is going to be a simple HighScores widget. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a new user interface, and it's going to be a widget blueprint. And I'm just going to call this HighScore widget. Now, because I know my functionality is identical to the HighScore entry board, I'm going to be a little bit cheeky here, and I'm going to go to my HighScore entry. I'm going to get this, and I'm going to go to the graph and just open up the getText function that we have. And then I'm just going to copy this straight out. So I'm just going to remove that, Control C. And in my HighScore widget, I'm going to set the screen size here to just be, say, 500 by 500. So I'm going to go to fill screen and just change it to custom. And I'm just going to type in 500 by 500, as that looks like a good enough square that will likely be the size of my widget. You know, just to be safe, actually, I might call it 800 by 800. I'm going to now add a text widget. This is going to be anchored to the top center, and I'm going to position its y-axis to be just beneath the top center here. X position as well, as I'm going to zero it out and instead change the alignment to be 0.5. I'm going to set the justification to be centered, and finally I'm going to set this to be size to content. I just needed a test value in there. And now with that set up, all I need to do is bind my text as we did before. But this time around, I'm going to hit Control V and just paste in what I had. I'm also going to need to recreate this this output text variable that we created before. And if I right click on it, I can now hit Create Local Variable Output Text. Upon hitting compile, this will actually run and should be fine. So now if I go back to my HighScore entry board that we had before, and I go to my designer and I delete this, you'll notice that if I compile, I can now delete my getText function as well. And in my designer, if I go down to user created, you'll see that we have HighScore widget here as an option. And if I drag this in, it's now actually got the demo text that I have there as a base. I'm just going to set this to be anchored in the center, and as before, 0, 0, but alignment is 0.5, 0.5. Might actually move this up just a fraction, and I'm going to check size to content on that as well. And in theory, if I was to hit play, and just quickly, actually I should set a HighScore just so we've got something on the list. Enter a name, and we can see that this is actually displaying it correctly in this area now, because this list is actually the widget that I just created. that has now gone straight into it. So that's fantastic, because that means that now when I go to create a main menu, I can just drop in a HighScores widget. So let's create that main menu.